Chapter 112. Trailing the suspicious duodeath was often associated with evil, treated as though it were inherently bad. But it wasn't. To put it simply, it was just another part of life. All things eventually came to an end. Even immortality was a fallacy. Unless, of course, one was a true god. Of course, such lofty philosophy was far from Michael's current understanding. Even as a necromancer, he still viewed death as a bad thing. A true practitioner of death would embrace it fully. Then again, that was a true practitioner. Anyone could practice something and excel at it, but grasping its true essence was rare. Without systematic training or mentorship, almost everything Michael knew about the supernatural was self-taught. Even now, he wasn't certain if death energy was the correct term, but sensing the familiar aura between him and those two men made it feel appropriate. Michael had read on forums that the panel only awakeners could see served more as a summary of one's abilities than a comprehensive list. Now he fully understood a part of it. Because nowhere on the forum did it mention that an awakened necromancer could hear voices from something as ethereal as energy. Why does their energy feel so evil? In truth, Michael already had an inkling of why that might be the case. He simply didn't want to accept it, both. Michael's, the one from Earth and the one from this world, though the former was more experienced in life, hadn't encountered truly dark forces. Almost all supernaturals had blood on their hands, partly from slaying monsters, which meant nearly all of them carried a trace of death energy. This imbued them with a unique presence that other supernaturals could sense. However, as a necromancer, Michael was more attuned to certain energies than even those stronger than him. Which was the reason this time, the energy surrounding those two supernaturals stood out way more to him as it was different. Despite his inner tremors, Michael proceeded with his plan. Undead Phantom Morpho LV, 2. Rank Common. Undead Spicebush Swallowtail Moth LV, 2. Rank Common. Just as the panel didn't reveal the full capabilities of an awakener, it often fell short when assessing monsters. Take Michael's spectral ant, for example. One would be in serious trouble if they approached it assuming the panel showed all it was capable of, only to be met with its 2-ton strength. The same applied to his Undead Phantom Morpho and Undead Spicebush Swallowtail Moth. Both were illusionary creatures that seemed like illusions themselves, even without using their skills. Of course, with their current strength, it was relatively easy for a powerful supernatural to detect them despite their racial abilities. However, the key was whether that supernatural cared enough to pay attention. In this scenario, the weakness of the two undead became Michael's strength, or rather, his perfect tools for spying on the suspicious ones. The small size of the Undead Phantom Morpho and the Undead Spicebush Swallowtail Moth was also a significant advantage. Go! Michael commanded the two undead, and they flew away from him towards the hotel building's exit, which also served as the entrance. Strangely, although the two flying undead were small in size, much like butterflies, when they passed in front of someone, it seemed as if they couldn't be seen, creating an eerie situation. The moment the two undead left him, Michael activated his skill, Share Senses, without hesitation. At its basic mastery, the skill allowed him to link to the senses of two undead within a 100-meter radius, which suited him perfectly. His current abilities only let him control undead within a 300-meter range, and the farther they were, the weaker his control became. For now, 100 meters was the sweet spot, assuming the targets remained within range. Those two are strong, Michael thought as his senses flared. However, he didn't feel an overwhelming threat. He estimated that he could handle either one individually, but taking them both down at once would be a challenge. Not that it mattered. Michael was never the type to fight solo. He was a necromancer, an exceptional one at that. The undead phantom morpho and undead spicebush swallowtail moth flitted out of the hotel, with Michael trailing behind them. Relying on his enhanced senses to navigate, he moved as though he could see everything clearly. His previous runs, too, and from the Supers Association, Branch had taught him how much he could trust his senses. His sensory perception was sharpest within a 20-meter radius, and for day-to-day use, this was more than enough. Although this was his first time using his senses in such a scenario, he wielded the ability as naturally as if he'd been born with it. By moving in sync with his undead, Michael ensured he stayed within the optimal range where share senses worked seamlessly. It had been more than 200 years since the Dark Age, when monsters reigned and demonic supernaturals ran rampant. Now, 2 centuries later, the world was far more at peace, and had even surpassed its pre-Dark Age state in terms of technological and societal advancement, or so most people in Aurora believed. However, only a select few knew the truth. The dangers of the past hadn't disappeared. If anything, they had grown stronger. Most ordinary citizens didn't even know what a demonic cultivator was. This ignorance was largely due to the Federation's efforts to keep such matters under wraps, often attributing incidents involving demonic cultivators to sudden cracks or crack outbreaks, much to the frustration of the demonic faction. Even after 200 years, Aurora remained divided into 3 main factions: the righteous faction, the demonic faction, and the neutral faction. However, in reality, traces of each faction could be found within the others. The Federation was the public representative of the righteous faction. Though primarily focused on protecting the innocent and maintaining order, some members secretly engaged in practices considered morally gray. The demonic faction, despite its foundation in chaos and the pursuit of power through darker means, had individuals who adopted more moderate methods. Some even harbored twisted yet righteous tendencies. The neutral faction, dedicated to maintaining balance, often housed individuals with personal ties to both the righteous and demonic factions. These crossovers made the political landscape of Aurora complex and fraught with hidden agendas. All of this was far removed from Michael's current concerns. His future remained unpredictable, but tonight would mark the first time he dabbled in the deep waters of his new world. If there was one thing demonic cultivators sought, it was power, and the freedom to wield it and get it without restraint. They saw themselves as superior beings, destined to rule, submitting only to the stronger fist. Yet they lived worse than the weak they so despised. Since their emergence, demonic supernaturals had been suppressed repeatedly, their struggle resembling that of hyenas against lions. However, after years of suppression and enduring defeat, they were finally ready to return in force. It took Michael some time to adjust to the vision of his undead phantom morpho and spicebush swallowtail moth. Though still limited to a monochrome world, connecting to their sight felt like viewing the world in 360 degrees through countless cameras. The dual connection made it even more disorienting. Fortunately, Michael's high intelligence provided him with the computational power to handle it. After a while, he managed to make sense of the dual vision filled with multiple angles. Fortunately, it seemed the suspicious duo's activities were confined to the hotel's surroundings, not far away. If they truly intended to leave, Michael knew there was little he could do to stop them. Following the duo, Michael studied their movements to try and discern what they planned to do. He quickly noticed something odd. Almost every few meters, the two dropped an odd-looking object on the floor in a specific pattern. When Michael first saw it, he quickly used Detect on the oddly shaped item that looked like a stone. Demon remains. A remnant of the flesh of a low-level demon. Demon remains. The two items together didn't seem like a good thing. What was worse was that, in his hesitation to find out whether he should pick up whatever it was in front of him, the remains of the demon seemed to dissolve into the ground and disappeared. It didn't only happen once. As Michael continued to trail after the two suspicious individuals, the same experience he had with the first one made Michael feel a little scared, yet very apprehensive towards touching the demon remains. It didn't really seem like a bright idea to touch them. But it also didn't seem like a good idea to let those two continue, as it didn't seem like they were up to good things. At least, he didn't see anything good from their actions. Throwing some sort of monster remains was enough suspicion that these two were definitely not doing community service. However, stopping them in public, even at night when there were still quite a number of people on the road, and even without this, a larger number of people residing in the buildings around them, might lead to a fight that would cause public destruction, which was something Michael didn't want. For a moment, he was conflicted. Mid-thought, an idea suddenly struck Michael. No, a realization. What am I even doing? Isn't the association responsible for handling supernatural affairs? For a moment, Michael felt stupid. It was clear that even with enhanced cognitive abilities, high mental processing power didn't equate to perfect intelligence. Then again, smart was a subjective term. Not everyone could have handled the current situation as well as Michael did, even if they had better resources. After the realization hit him that he was concerning himself with matters far outside his paycheck, something he didn't even have, Michael immediately pulled out his phone. He had a new plan: to inform the association. The Supers Association had its own hotline, with each branch maintaining specific numbers. However, like most regular people, Michael hadn't memorized it. If it wasn't the police hotline, it wasn't exactly common knowledge. Okay, that wasn't entirely true. Michael could have easily searched for the number online, but instead, he scrolled through his contacts for one person who'd reached out to him earlier that day. Grace. She had called him about his advancement, and since they weren't familiar enough for personal calls, she must have used one of the association's official lines. Besides, it was easy to distinguish between regular contacts and those that weren't. Trailing behind the suspicious duo through dark alleyways, Michael did his best to suppress his presence, sweat trickling down his back. He located the contact and dialed it. Ring. The call connected almost instantly. A calm yet serious male voice came through the line. Hello, this is the Supers Association. Who am I speaking with, and how can I help you today? Good morning. I'm Michael Norman, and I have something to report, Michael said in a low, measured tone. Please go ahead. There are two men staying at the hotel I'm lodged in. I wasn't trying to meddle in anyone's business, but something about them seemed off. When I followed them, I found them handling what looked like demon remains. The remains dissolved into the ground and they continued this in a structured pattern. I didn't know what else to do, so I called. Wait, demon remains? Yes. And how do you know that? The voice grew skeptical but also more serious. I'm an awakener. It's one of my skills. I see. And you say the remains are dissolving into the ground? Yes. This sounds beyond my jurisdiction. Please hold for a moment. I'll be right back. The man's voice became hurried, and Michael could hear rapid movement in the background. Before he could respond, the line went quiet. Michael sighed. The reaction only confirmed what he already suspected. This wasn't a simple matter. Demons? His tone changed as soon as I mentioned it. What's really going on here? He muttered. Before he could think further, a different voice came through the phone, one he instantly recognized. Repeat what you just said. Teacher Brian. Michael was taken aback. It was indeed the voice of Brian from the trade center. You, Brian sounded equally surprised, but quickly returned to his usual businesslike tone. "Where are you?" Michael described the hotel and its surroundings, providing as much detail as possible. Although the suspicious Dew had moved away, the hotel remained the most recognizable landmark. Once Michael finished, the call abruptly ended, leaving him stunned. "What now?" he muttered, unsure of his next move. He was about to link his vision back to his undead when a voice suddenly spoke beside him. "This is quite a good hiding spot." Michael's heart jumped, and his body reacted instinctively. He swung his hand toward the source of the voice, but it was caught effortlessly with a force that nullified any power it had. "Good instincts," the voice said calmly, "but poor form and terrible strength distribution, probably due to having so much." Michael's eyelid twitched as he turned to see who it was. "You're fast, Teacher Brian." Brian nodded slightly, releasing his grip on Michael's wrist. "MHMM." Brian turned his head slightly, scanning the area like he was searching for something specific. Michael noticed him fixating on the direction where the two suspicious men had headed, the same direction where his undead were trailing them. "No wonder we couldn't locate them for long. They're using advanced aura suppression arts. You'd have to get quite close to detect the subtle differences," Brian muttered aloud. Michael listened intently. He knew what arts were in the cultivation world, techniques that utilized one's mana to produce various effects. From Brian's words, Michael understood that the two men were likely bad people, given their actions and reliance on aura-hiding techniques. "How did you manage to find them when our men couldn't?" Brian asked, his tone curious. Michael hesitated, confused about why they weren't pursuing the suspects immediately. Their aura, it felt very ominous. Ominous in what way? It felt resentful. The death energy around them didn't seem like something you'd get just from killing monsters. Brian narrowed his eyes. "That depends. After all, not every monster comes from a crack." "Huh?" Michael blinked, puzzled by the cryptic response. "Just continue," Brian urged, his tone brisk. Michael adjusted his thoughts before speaking. "The death energy around them," he began, pausing under Brian's intense, unreadable gaze. "It spoke, and for some reason I knew it didn't come from monsters. It came from humans." "Yes." "Then they're demonic cultivators." Michael's eyes widened in shock. He'd suspected something dark about the duo, but didn't dare to conclude. Now, learning they were part of a group responsible for nationwide crises and mass sacrifices 2 centuries ago left him shaken. Brian didn't give him time to dwell on the revelation. "Interesting method you've got there, but don't be too quick to assume someone's guilty just because of what you sense. As an awakener, I'm guessing your class allows you to detect certain things others can't, but it still depends on you to discern what is actually as it seems." Michael frowned. "But you just said they're demonic cultivators. Isn't it possible you're wrong?" "Oh, I'm not wrong." Brian raised his hand toward the sky, and Michael, puzzled, followed his gaze. What he saw made his breath catch. The sky was riddled with cracks. Familiar cracks Michael couldn't be any more familiar with. They were dimensional cracks. And looking at their appearance, they were corrupted-type cracks. Worse, their corrupted edges tinged with a faint red glow. A clear sign of an impending crack break. To think, even after all our efforts, they'd still succeed. "Those damned demons," Brian muttered bitterly. "Can't we stop it? As long as nothing comes out, there's still a chance, right?" Michael asked, his voice tinged with urgency. He wasn't naive. He didn't know why cracks would suddenly appear in the sky, but he understood the stakes. If those cracks broke, half the city, if not the entire city, would fall. The chaotic energy in the sky intensified, growing from a faint hum to levels surpassing what Michael had felt even near a level 2 crack. Michael hastily linked his senses to his undead phantom, Morpho, and his undead spicebush swallowtail moth. His heart sank as he saw what they had discovered. The two men had activated a magic circle in a secluded alley while Michael was distracted, speaking with the association. It was obvious everything had been planned in advance, and Michael hadn't been able to stop it. No wonder Brian hadn't bothered chasing them. It was already too late. There's nothing you can do to stop a dimensional crack from opening, except, Michael interjected sharply, desperation evident in his voice. Brian wasn't offended. Instead, for the first time, Michael saw a clear expression on the man's face, one of yearning. "Except if you were a god," Brian said quietly. "Stopping a crack, it's a natural disaster. To go against nature, you'd need to be as strong as it." Michael fell silent, his mind racing. If there were a god in Woodstone City, they would have already stopped this. He also didn't ask why Brian was so calm in the face of catastrophe. Michael had his own guilt and worries to bear. Guilt for not acting sooner and fear for his family. The cracks in the sky stretched so much he could tell there were already dangerously close to the area where his aunt and cousin lived. For a moment, Michael felt paralyzed by the weight of it all. Then Brian's voice broke through his thoughts. "You might feel guilty for not acting sooner, but your actions wouldn't have changed much. Even if you'd stopped those two, you'd have only delayed a few cracks or prevented a handful of stronger monsters from appearing. The outcome would still be the same." Brian's eyes narrowed, his tone sharp. "If you want to blame someone, blame the Federation." As the two conversed, the streets gradually filled with people. The sight in the sky was impossible to miss. The previously dark streets lit up as residents emerged from their homes, drawn by the ominous spectacle above. Phones were whipped out, their cameras capturing the cracks spreading across the heavens. Michael watched it all unfold, a sinking feeling settling in his chest. He partly understood something then. This city was halfway doomed. When Brian mentioned blaming the Federation, he was specifically referring to their failure to stop and apprehend the culprits before the situation escalated to this point. Being a man of few words, he didn't bother explaining further, leaving Michael to interpret his meaning on his own. On Michael's side, his emotions grew more tangled as he observed the growing crowd on the streets. What frustrated him most was how, despite the evident panic, people seemed more focused on recording the spectacle and posting it online. These people clearly had no grasp of the imminent danger they faced, having been so heavily sheltered by the Federation. Their survival instincts were practically non-existent, worse than those of a chicken, Michael thought grimly. Not long ago, he had been just like them. Only after becoming a supernatural did he finally see a crack with his own eyes. Ironically, despite cracks being such a significant part and history of the world, their dangers were never truly emphasized, not even in textbooks. Monsters were only depicted in textbooks, and even then, the images were neither detailed nor terrifying. They were often presented as simple black and white diagrams, used as mere examples rather than true representations of the horrors they posed. Had these people understood the horrors that lurked behind the cracks, perhaps they'd be rushing to evacuate rather than creating what would likely be their last memories in this world. Michael had his own worries to focus on. His family. Brian's voice came back again and broke through his thoughts. "The cracks won't fully open for another 20 minutes or so. That's just enough time to appreciate being alive. Prepare yourself, boy. This will be your first major trial as a warrior of the Federation." Michael noticed the yearning in Brian's voice vanish, replaced by his usual composed tone. "And don't worry about those two. I'll handle them. Knowing their type, they'll definitely try something to make the chaos worse. Do your best to survive. You could run, but if you do, you'll be branded a traitor to the Federation, someone who abandoned their responsibilities. Trust me, you won't like the consequences." Brian paused for a moment, then added with a strange finality, "Seems like a new era is about to begin." With that, Brian vanished, leaving Michael to his spiraling thoughts. Shaking off his daze, Michael quickly connected his vision to that of his undead, wanting to see the suspicious duo tied to this madness. However, what he saw was a fading magic circle. There was no sign of the culprits. Teacher Brian must have taken them, Michael realized, and he'd done so effortlessly. Michael stopped bothering about that matter. Without wasting another second, Michael left the alley and reappeared near the duo's last known location. He then swiftly retrieved his undead into his storage space. With nothing else to do at this place and the looming threat of the cracks breaking in the sky, Michael had only one thing left to do: go to his family. He never thought he'd be rushing home because of something like this. Just as he turned to leave, his phone vibrated in his pocket. The constant buzzing made it clear it wasn't just a text. Michael felt a flash of impatience, tempted to ignore the call, but in the end, he pulled out his phone. The caller ID surprised him. It was his aunt. Michael's hand trembled as he answered immediately. "Aunt Mia." "Michael, are you okay? Can you come home now? It's not safe outside, Michael. Please come home." He could hear the desperation in her voice, a tone that pierced his heart. Aunt Mia wasn't just his aunt. She was the only maternal figure he had ever known. After spending more than a decade together from childhood to now, she was more like a mother. And Lily, her daughter, was a sister figure to him. Their bond had deepened over years of being a family of three. It was obvious his worry about them wasn't one-sided. "Don't worry, Aunt Mia, I'm on my way. Just wait for me," Michael said softly, his voice steady as he tried to calm her down. "Okay, but hurry, okay?" she pleaded. "I will," Michael reassured her before the call ended. Hearing her voice eased his tension and renewed his resolve. Just as he was about to put the phone back in his pocket, another call came in. This time, the name on the screen made his breath hitch. It was another familiar person. Myra. Michael hesitated briefly, his gaze fixed on the cracks in the sky. The ominous red glow around them intensified, slowly painting the heavens crimson. With a deep breath, he answered the call. "Are you seeing this too?" Myra's sharp voice cut straight to the point. "I'm right under it," Michael replied, his tone grim. "Do you know what's going on?" she pressed, though her tone made it clear she wasn't expecting much of an answer. Unexpectedly, she got one. "Yeah, it's demonic cultivators," Michael said bluntly, dropping the bomb without further explanation. "Stay safe. It's about to get messy. We'll talk later if things go well. I need to be with my family." Without waiting for a response, Michael ended the call. At any other time, this would have been considered rude, even disrespectful, but right now, he couldn't care less. With a deep breath and a face devoid of emotion, Michael disappeared from the spot. A while later. "Knock, knock." "Who's there?" a cautious voice called from behind the door. "It's me, Aunt Mia, it's Michael." He could hear hurried footsteps approaching, and soon the door swung open, revealing Aunt Mia's tired face. Behind her, Lily peeked out, curiosity and worry written all over her young features. "I'm back," Michael said, forcing a smile. On Myra's side, her face twitched as the call with Michael abruptly ended. That guy, she thought bitterly. Her hands clenched at her sides as she resisted the urge to curse out loud. Still, she couldn't ignore what Michael had said before cutting her off. His family. Myra turned to glance at her mother, who was staring out the window, her eyes fixed on the ominous cracks in the sky. Myra couldn't quite put it into words, but ever since her awakening, she had noticed subtle changes in her mother. She seemed to be regaining the cheerfulness she had lost after Myra's father's death, as if awakening had brought hope back into their lives. Myra didn't want that to stop. A determined expression settled on her face as she picked up her phone and dialed a number. The call connected immediately. Lillian, after talking with Aunt Mia for a while, Michael realized she had sent him a message earlier. Unfortunately, it was around the time he had been busy in the land of origin, so there was no way he could have seen it. He hadn't even bothered to check for any missed calls or messages after returning to the real world, heading straight to the association to sell the corpses he had collected. When Michael finally looked at the message, he saw it was about the money he had sent her. As expected, Aunt Mia had overreacted, or rather, reacted appropriately, to him suddenly transferring such a large amount at once. Checking his call log, Michael saw he also had a couple of missed calls from her before she had decided to send the message instead. Michael felt a twinge of guilt, but there was nothing he could do about the past. It wasn't that he had intentionally ignored her. He had simply been too occupied at the time. The content of the message was exactly what one would expect from a worried guardian. How did you get the money? Are you safe? Are you in trouble? Call me when you see this. Why did you send so much money? She had essentially rephrased the same concern several times. However, unlike what Michael expected, that Aunt Mia would calm down after seeing him and start asking various questions, she didn't. Instead, her first question was about what was going on. In her mind, she didn't expect much of an answer from Michael. After all, he had only been an awakener for barely 5 days. That was hardly enough time to make significant connections or understand the intricacies of supernatural events, let alone something as monumental as this. This was her thought process, which wasn't illogical. Even someone as ordinary as Aunt Mia could tell that the situation with the sky wasn't normal and had to be significant. But despite recognizing this, she wasn't particularly worried. In her mind, she believed the Federation would handle everything. Like most people, she thought the same way. If the sky falls, there's always someone taller to hold it up. And she wasn't entirely wrong. The Federation was strong, more than capable of handling a myriad of crises. However, even a strong man could be caught off guard by a sudden blow. The Federation oversaw the entire Aurora realm. There was bound to be loopholes in their concentration. Michael didn't think the current issue would be too much for the association to handle, but from Brian's words, he knew everything had escalated far too quickly. Still, he held on to the hope that the Federation would be able to resolve the impending doom. It shouldn't take someone strong long to reach here, but the demonic cultivators must know that too. There was no way they would orchestrate something like this and allow the Federation to resolve it so easily. For a group that had managed to fight a behemoth like the Federation for over 2 centuries, they had to have their own means. Even someone as strong as Teacher Brian had spoken with such grave seriousness about the current situation, his words implying that the Federation might not intervene in time. Michael knew he had to prepare himself to face the crisis. If someone as powerful as Brian had little room for relaxation, there was no reason for someone as weak as Michael to feel at ease. But that was his burden to bear. His family didn't need to worry about such things. His duty was to protect them in any way he could. I don't know what's going on, Aunt Mia, but don't move too far from me. The Federation should be able to handle this. Aunt Mia nodded. Michael's response was exactly what she had expected. As for the part about staying close to him, she saw no issue with it. It had been her plan all along. Michael simply reiterating it only reinforced her resolve. Though she doubted Michael had become extraordinarily strong in such a short time, he was still a supernatural, and it made sense to stay by his side. With that, the family gathered in the sitting room. Aunt Mia turned on the television, switching channels to find any news covering the current situation, while Michael stood by the window, observing the sky. The chaotic mixture of energies above hadn't changed much. Michael could now distinguish energy levels comparable to the level 1 crack he had been to, the Goblin world, and others like the level 2 crack he had ventured into, the Ape region. However, these were smaller and closer to the ground compared to the massive cracks in the sky. Judging by the frequency of their chaotic energy, Michael could sense they'd be the first to break, releasing monsters. And it wouldn't take long. Can't I just run away with Aunt Mia and Lily? Michael thought. With my undead, it shouldn't be too hard to escape before the cracks fully break. The thought left a slight bitter taste in his mouth. It felt a little cruel to him to discard everyone else even as he had the power to help a little. Yet he couldn't deny he wasn't entirely against the idea. Michael only felt a twinge of guilt, not true remorse for leaving others behind. Another thing the pre-awakening him would feel different about. However, Brian's parting words still lingered in his mind. If he fled, he would be branded a fugitive alongside his family. As much as he wanted to be selfish, his actions would have consequences for his loved ones, and that alone kept him from acting on the thought. That and the possibility his family wouldn't even agree to leave. Though he'd only recently begun learning the truth about the world, Michael didn't need much time to understand the situation of the humans living in Aurora. Even now, with cracks forming in the sky, people were still out on the streets, laughing, taking photos, and treating the disaster like a spectacle. Michael could already predict the outcome, the dawn of the Dark Age. It said that on an otherwise ordinary afternoon, cracks of various sizes suddenly appeared in the sky, causing mass panic worldwide. These cracks weren't just anomalies. They became portals from which monsters poured out, wreaking havoc and destruction. Michael knew the historical accounts well, both from school and from forum discussions. But the current situation felt different. For one, he believed people back then had sharper survival instincts, reacting swiftly to the unknown anomaly. Secondly, according to records, the highest-level cracks during the dawn of the Dark Age were only level 2, and even those were rare. It wasn't until much later that stronger cracks began to appear. Now, as Michael assessed the chaotic energy radiating from the sky, he could sense at least 2 level 2 cracks in his vicinity, along with multiple level 1s. He wasn't overly concerned about the level 1 or 2 cracks. He might not be able to protect the entire neighborhood, but he could certainly shield his family. At this point, Michael had stopped feeling guilt about the issue with the suspicious duo earlier. Looking at how it seemed like the entire city was covered in this cracks, there was really nothing he could do except make the final result slightly better. What worried him were the cracks above level 2, the ones farther from the ground. Though Michael's understanding of power levels among awakeners and cultivators was still shaky, he doubted he could handle a level 4 crack on his own. He figured that, with Lucky and Prince by his side, a level 3 might be manageable, but even that wasn't guaranteed. Crack monsters were different from regular monsters, with their overwhelming numbers being their most dangerous trait. Yet those cracks weren't his primary concern. The Federation and the Association were tasked with handling such large-scale threats. As Michael watched the cracks near the ground turn a deeper red, the people outside finally began to sense the danger and grew visibly uneasy. His thoughts raced. Isn't it said that aside from the initial cracks at the start of the apocalypse, cracks naturally form due to negative energy? But all these cracks were caused by demonic cultivators. Or is it one of those natural disasters triggered by human actions? More pressing was whether he could boost his strength at the last minute. The only viable method was to use his evolution points. Unfortunately, Michael wasn't in a position to leave the original world for the land of origin. Closing his eyes for even a second could result in waking up to a monster inside his apartment. More importantly, Leaving would endanger not only his family but also himself, as his body would remain defenseless while he was in the land of origin, a glaring weakness for awakeners at his level. It was said that this vulnerability diminished at higher ranks, but such knowledge was far beyond Michael's reach. Thankfully, before leaving the land of origin earlier, Michael had summoned all the undead he could dismiss back into the netherworld. The only ones left behind were either newly revived, unevolved, or unable to be summoned yet. At least this happened after I equipped my undead. That thought gave Michael some solace, though he knew it was the least of his concerns. Still, a part of him was relieved that he wouldn't have to summon a bunch of naked corpses in front of his aunt and cousin. Just as that faintly amusing thought crossed his mind, Michael's phone vibrated. In a daze, he pulled it out and saw a notification. It was a message from the association. Urgent, monsters are emerging from cracks in the city. Every supernatural is mandated to protect the public. Noncompliance will result in severe punishment. Repeat, all Federation-affiliated supernaturals in Woodstone City must safeguard the public from immediate threats. Free use of ability in public is permitted. May the will of Aurora live for 1,000,000 years. As Michael finished reading the message, a sudden shout echoed from outside the apartment, drawing his attention, and that of his aunt and cousin. "Look, something's coming out of that crack." Michael cursed under his breath. The sight of a crack alone should have been enough to keep anyone inside, even without knowing about monster-infested cracks, as one wouldn't know what it looked like until one saw it. A knowledge reserved for supernaturals. Basic survival instincts should have kicked in. Michael turned toward the direction of the shout. A couple stood outside, the woman pointing at a specific crack in the sky. Michael followed her gesture, his eyes narrowing. Then he froze. Emerging slowly from the crack were small green figures. The couple, hindered by the dim light, couldn't make out the details, but Michael could. His sharp eyes caught the unmistakable sight of green hands clawing their way out of the rift. "What's that?" Michael heard Lily's voice beside him as she tried to squeeze past him for a better view. Michael wasn't about to let that happen. With a firm grip, he pulled her back and spoke in a calm but commanding tone. His cold green eyes sent a chill down Lily's spine, the first time her cousin had ever unsettled her like this. "Stay here and don't move, you too, Aunt Mia." His voice was soft yet authoritative, leaving both of them in a daze. They nodded instinctively. Michael turned his attention back outside. By now, it had finally dawned on the crowd that staying outside was a terrible idea, and people began rushing indoors. But it was too late. The full appearance of the green figures came into view as they plummeted from the sky. Some crashed into the ground, breaking limbs and leaving pools of blood. Others landed directly on fleeing civilians, crushing them on impact. The chaos escalated. Some of the green creatures survived with broken limbs. Others were cushioned by their companions, emerging in better shape. Hundreds of these figures rained down, filling the surroundings with screams and carnage. It felt as though hell had descended on Aurora. Hell had truly descended. Even for Aunt Mia and Lily, who weren't part of the chaos outside. They had just turned to head toward the sitting room, following Michael's instructions, when the horrifying scene stopped them dead in their tracks. "Monsters' blood, they're dead, they're dead." Lily's voice faltered as she stumbled backward, her broken sentences growing shriller with each word. She stepped away from the window in panic, but lost her footing and fell hard to the floor, her cries cutting off abruptly. "Shit!" Michael cursed under his breath, momentarily stunned. He hadn't expected the damage that would be caused by the creatures emerging from the cracks to be easy to resolve, but what he hadn't foreseen was the sudden appearance and the sheer number that followed. Not only had multiple cracks opened simultaneously, but the monsters poured out rapidly. Level 1 cracks most times had at least 200 from each crack. Even if they emerged 10 at a time, it was overwhelming. In the brief moment of shock, Michael had already seen several people die, their bodies crushed or torn apart before they could even react. He clenched his fists. He couldn't let this continue. Though he found himself growing more detached emotionally, he wasn't completely numb. Watching so many die right in front of him stirred something within, a mix of frustration and anger. But his family came first, always. Lily lay on the floor, grimacing in pain, her ankle twisted at a slightly odd angle. She'd badly sprained it during her fall. Aunt Mia knelt beside her, trembling but trying to comfort her daughter. "Michael, close the window. We need to lock the doors, the windows, everything." Aunt Mia struggled to speak, her voice trembling as if she might burst into tears at any moment. Yet despite her fear, she clung to a facade of strength. Her body trembled as she tried to pull Michael away from the window to lock it herself. But even if Michael hadn't awakened, moving him would have been a tall order, and now it was impossible. Michael stood firm, unmoving, his gaze fixed outside. "Why aren't you moving?" she whimpered, her voice cracking. "Those things, they might find us." The dam broke. Aunt Mia's tears streamed down her face, and she began to sob quietly. Lily, lying on the floor, wasn't faring much better. Tears streaked her cheeks, but the pain in her leg and the instinct to stay silent stifled her cries. The horrifying sight of monsters and humans being crushed to death had clearly left a heavy mark on them. Michael's heart ached at the sight of his family in such despair, but he had no time to console them. While Aunt Mia focused on locking up the house, Michael's sharp gaze remained on the chaos outside. Now he could see some people attempting to fight back against the monsters that poured from the cracks. Some of them were ordinary humans or old knight apprentices who had failed to ignite their life seeds, yet had pushed their bodies to the human limit. Others moved with blinding speed, clearly strong supernaturals. But it was a losing battle. The sheer number of monsters far outstripped the handful of defenders, and the chaos only continued to grow. If things were going to improve, Michael knew he had to act. Initially, Michael had only intended to intervene, because he couldn't just sit by and watch people die. He wasn't so cold as to ignore the situation entirely. Sending out one of his undead would have also been enough to fulfill the Supernaturals Association's mandatory participation request. But as he watched other supernaturals slaying the monsters, a new thought crossed his mind. Experience points. He hadn't considered this before, too focused on the chaos unfolding. Now, with the chaos fully unleashed, his mind shifted. Even if he didn't care about the people, he could do it for the sake of gaining more experience. In the end, his actions would still save lives. At this moment, thoughts of the academy were the last thing on Michael's mind. Like many other awakeners, he was consumed by the pursuit of power. Or more like the obsession of leveling up. "Stay here, Aunt Mia. It's not safe outside," Michael said firmly. "Lock everything like you just mentioned and don't let anyone in, no matter who they are." Mia opened her mouth to protest, but the words caught in her throat as Michael stretched out his hand. A large figure clad in black armor, wielding an oversized hammer, materialized before her, its imposing form nearly touching the ceiling. Though its face was hidden, the sheer presence of the figure felt like a beast staring her down. Mia stood frozen, her mind a flurry of questions. What was happening outside was terrifying enough, but now she wanted answers about the strange, witchcraft-like magic circle that had appeared in her home, summoning this monstrous figure. "Beginning," Michael commanded the undead. "Protect her and her. Remember, protect them both. Nothing, absolutely nothing, must happen to them." He kept the instructions simple. Terms like aunt or cousin might complicate the command, so he avoided them altogether. Satisfied, Michael turned back and drew a weapon he hadn't touched since his awakening, one of his first purchases. A dagger. When Michael first awakened, the initial weapons he bought before entering the land of origin were three: a gun, a spear, and a dagger. Of the three, only the dagger remained relatively unused. Occasionally, in moments of idle thought, Michael had considered selling or discarding it, but now, here it was, about to be handed to his aunt. It was one of the worst weapons for supernaturals, but for an ordinary person, it was far better than a kitchen knife. "Aunt Mia, please take this," Michael said, pressing the dagger into her hand. "You probably won't need it with my undead here, but just in case, I'll be back soon. Don't leave unless absolutely necessary." He didn't give her a chance to refuse, placing the weapon firmly in her grasp before turning to Lily, who had stopped crying. Her gaze shifted between Beginning's massive form and her injured leg, a mix of surprise and pain etched on her face. "Be careful, okay?" Michael said softly, crouching beside her. "Don't move too much because of your leg. Listen to Aunt Mia and stay close to this big guy. He'll keep you both safe." Lily nodded, and Michael gave her a reassuring smile. "Michael," Aunt Mia began, but before she could finish, Michael had already leaped out of the window. There was no dramatic, ground-shattering landing. How could there be, when Michael had only jumped from his second-floor apartment? If it had been a skyscraper, perhaps such theatrics would have been justified. A cracked ground would have signaled that Michael had put too much force into the landing, an overzealous use of strength or pure vanity. But in a situation where a massacre was unfolding, who was there to impress? Monsters. The dying. Corpses. Michael didn't want to waste even a moment. The instant his feet hit the ground, he summoned his weapon from the storage space. In a fluid motion, effortlessly decapitated three green-skinned creatures charging toward him. The green figures weren't unfamiliar to Michael. Hobgoblins and goblins, with the latter appearing in greater numbers. The goblins, he had hunted himself in the level 1 crack, the goblin world, and brought from the association from the real world. The hobgoblins, however, were creatures he hadn't seen in the real world or in the land of origin, but thanks to the evolution of his talent, he had been able to evolve his 1-star undead goblin to 3-star common rank hobgoblin, making him quite familiar with them. Their presence only confirmed his earlier theory. There existed an evolutionary path for the monsters in nature. Unfortunately, the monsters now were all high-leveled. Hobgoblin LV11. Rank Common. Goblin LV6. Rank Common. Goblin LV5. Rank Common. For weaker supernaturals, these creatures would be deadly. But to Michael, they were nothing more than experience points that were waiting to be harvested by his spear. Venomfang Spear. Rank Rare. Type Poison Spear. Inflicts a potent poison on the target, dealing continuous damage over time and weakening their defenses. The spear's razor-sharp edge was as deadly as its venomous bite. Michael wasn't planning to idly stand by while these experience points, monsters, continued their rampage. Drawing on his mana reserves, he activated his summoning skill. Greenish-black circles appeared around him, and moments later, towering figures emerged from the void. Michael could summon a total of 12 undead from the netherworld. 3 wolves, 1 ape, and 8 orcs. With Beginning, the first goblin he had evolved, guarding his family, Michael called forth 9 more. His summoned army consisted of a verdant wolf, 5 male orcs, 3 female orcs, and a blue-furred ape. Each one of them was a 1-star rare-ranked creature, their power rivaling that of a peak elite cultivator, rank 2 at least. Michael didn't summon Lucky or Prince for now. Without hesitation, Michael issued a cold, unwavering command. Kill every monster in sight. The moment his voice echoed, his undead army, along with Michael as the lead, vanished into the chaos. It didn't take long for the people in the surrounding area to notice the sudden shift in the battlefield. After all, how could they not? 10 humanoid figures, each radiating immense power, tore through the hordes with ruthless efficiency, relentlessly killing everything that came in their path. Michael's spear had become an extension of his will, its venom claiming one goblin life after the other. In fact, he had lost count of how many times he had swung his spear, yet despite his relentless effort, the decrease in monsters he had anticipated never came. The good thing was that thanks to his efforts, his undead, and the other supernaturals in the area, they had managed to immediately stop the carnage, even allowing some ordinary citizens to seek shelter in the still-standing buildings nearby. However, even those buildings weren't entirely safe. From time to time, agonizing screams echoed from within, piercing the air. Not all the level 1 cracks that unleashed monsters appeared directly above ground. Some had erupted on rooftops. The monsters emerging from those cracks were at an advantage, as they didn't fall far. They could find multiple ways to infiltrate the buildings, and when faced with even weak monsters like goblins, ordinary people didn't stand a chance. Fortunately, Michael didn't have to worry about his family. By frequently circling the vicinity of his apartment building and checking his connection with beginning, he was reassured that his family remained safe and there were no breaches around them. His aunt, though naturally kind-hearted, understood the severity of the situation and refrained from causing unnecessary trouble. And although Michael hadn't noticed any sign of monsters breaking into his apartment building, since no screams had erupted so far, he didn't want to take any chances. He stationed one undead to actively patrol and clear the area around the building, while another stood guard for potential emergencies. He also hadn't forgotten Brian's warning about the possibility of demonic supernaturals sowing more chaos. But after remaining vigilant for so long and finding no signs of their presence, Michael concluded two possibilities. They were either hiding and biding their time, or they were targeting more significant locations than the old estate where Michael lived. Minutes passed as Michael mulled over his thoughts, issued commands to his undead, and continued to fight the monsters raining from the crack tirelessly. Eventually, the immediate area was cleared. However, no one celebrated. Corpses, both human and monster, were strewn across the ground, painting a grim scene of devastation. It resembled the aftermath of an apocalypse. Among the supernaturals, only a handful now remained standing, and even then just barely. The ones who had reacted to the chaos appeared far older than Michael, a clear sign they had awakened their powers much later in their lives. The only thing distinguishing them from ordinary citizens was the life seed embedded within. But what truly gripped the crowd with dread was the sight above. The cracks in the sky had thinned, but their ominous presence remained. There were fewer of them now, not because they were closing, but because their density had dispersed, revealing a sprawling, interconnected network. "Will the next cracks to break be level 2s?" Michael muttered, his expression souring at the thought. He wasn't worried about the monsters themselves. Against those from level 1 cracks, he hadn't even bothered using his skills, just his raw physical stats and spear. He doubted much would change with the next wave. At most, his killing speed might slow down slightly. But what truly concerned him was the sheer volume of monsters and the escalating pattern of the cracks. The first wave had unleashed level 1 cracks. If this second wave were to bring level 2 monsters, what would follow? Level 3s, level 4s. Michael doubted he was overthinking. Some cracks that were high in the sky and distant from his immediate vicinity radiated with a chilling, oppressive aura. Even now, they sent chills down his spine. Yet, amidst the growing dread, Michael couldn't ignore a part of himself that was relishing this unfolding chaos, a realization that left him feeling a pang of guilt. Status: Name: Michael Norman. Class: Adept Necromancer. Level 15. EXP: 16,644 17718. Michael felt conflicted, but knowing that he was just minutes away from leveling up made him wonder what kind of heaven and hell he had stumbled into. Heaven and hell. It seemed the perfect way to describe the scene around him. The once peaceful estate he had known for years was now drenched in blood. The fleeting sense of satisfaction Michael felt instantly vanished the moment his gaze swept over the carnage. He turned his gaze toward his apartment building, or more specifically, the window he had leapt from. Aunt Mia stood there, peeking through the window. Her body trembled, but she forced herself to watch, not the carnage but at him. Michael frowned. He hated what Aunt Mia was doing to herself. This was nothing short of mental torture. Yet there were things he couldn't control, her freedom to be one of them. Strangely, while the bloody massacre before him was horrific, it stirred little more than mild discomfort. Perhaps it was because he had spent the past few days knee-deep in corpses, battling monsters, and narrowly escaping death. This kind of horror barely fazed him anymore. What he did feel, however, was anger. It wasn't a righteous fury or some heroic urge to save the world. This was personal. It was about his family. Michael had inherited this body's feelings and memories. While he still recalled his past life on Earth, those memories felt distant, like fragments of a dream. This world, though more perilous, had given him something his old life never did: a healthy body and extraordinary power. He had an incredible undead army and a unique talent. Even if someday most of it was stripped away, the healthy body alone was enough for Michael to embrace this new life fully. And now, a group of lunatics called demonic supernaturals wanted to ruin that. Michael's anger ignited, burning hot and fierce. What would have happened if he hadn't awakened? This plan had clearly been in motion far longer than Michael could fathom, its reach engulfing an entire city like Woodstone. Without his powers, his family, and he himself would have perished. To some degree, Michael could understand the mindset of the demonic supernaturals. Growth often reshapes perspective. The rich cannot truly understand the struggles of the poor, just as the poor can't comprehend the life of the rich. Mortals can't fathom the thoughts of gods. But understanding did not mean forgiveness. If one aspired to live like a king, or at least experience a life different from the constraints of an ordinary life, then the battle should be against those in power, not those who didn't have any of it. In Michael's opinion, doing the opposite of this felt both flawed and twisted. As a human, he understood what he was capable of thinking. If he, one day, as a rank 4 awakener, were ever forced to stand in a long queue with ordinary humans and be treated the same, he knew he'd lose his mind. Though he didn't think this was likely to happen in real life, considering how supernaturals had little societal influence despite their overwhelming power, who knew if something like this had happened before or not. Perhaps, at some point in his 18 years in this realm, someone with godlike abilities had been forced to behave like an ordinary human, waiting in line like everyone else alongside him. Michael could understand where the bitterness stemmed from, but that didn't excuse poor behavior. "Thank you so much for your help." Michael, who was still lost in thought as he stared at the red, gloomy sky with a frown, was pulled back to reality by a voice. He turned his head and saw an elderly man standing beside him. Though the man's face seemed vaguely familiar, Michael didn't know him personally. "It's no problem. This is what I should be doing," Michael replied politely. The old man opened his mouth to speak more, but a sudden scream cut through the air, interrupting him. Following the scream, Two hands grabbed Michael's shirt. "You killed my father! You killed my father!" A young man, roughly Michael's age, stood before him. His hair was dyed in 3 colors and tattoos covered his face. Though Michael wasn't one to judge by appearances, it was clear what kind of person was clutching his shirt now. Unfortunately, not only did Michael not know this person, but he also couldn't understand the sudden hostility. Worse still, his patience was already running thin. He had just slain over 200 monsters, his bloodlust was still simmering, and the thrill of battle was pulsing in his veins. It was a miracle he hadn't slapped the man outright. "Get your hands off me." Michael's voice was calm, but it carried a chill that sent shivers down everyone's spine who heard it. Even the surviving ordinary people, mourning over their lost loved ones or their own injuries, fell silent and stared at him. Despite the warning, the young man didn't let go. Sweat dripped down his forehead as he glared at Michael with defiance. "Oh, and what will you do? Do you think that just because you have some fancy powers you can do whatever you want?" The youth spat, jealousy and rage flashing in his eyes. Michael's gaze turned icy. He debated whether to handle this lightly or use some force, but before he could decide how to act, a fist flew from nowhere, slamming the young man square in the face. The blow sent the youth flying 5 meters away, leaving the crowd stunned. The one who delivered the punch was someone Michael recognized, his neighbor from the apartment building. The man was one of the strongest supernaturals who had fought alongside him during the chaos. "Brats these days, they don't know their limits or when to show gratitude," the man muttered, turning to Michael, who watched him curiously. "My apologies for my nephew's behavior," the man said with a sigh. "He's just grieving my brother's death. Some people, blinded by their upbringing, believe everyone is equal. They simply refuse to accept the truth of the world." Man's words carried a terrace of double meaning. It made sense. Only a supernatural could truly understand another supernatural. Michael's neighbor, who happened to be a peak mid-stage knight, seemed to embody this notion. But what surprised Michael more was how casually the man had spoken about his brother's death. For a moment, his words made Michael suspect the two might have had a strained relationship, perhaps even worse. Maybe the man had left his brother to die, unwilling to save him from the claws of the monsters. Though Michael's expression remained neutral, his wariness grew. He was already considering adding this neighbor to his blacklist when the man continued speaking. "I'm sorry for my nephew's rude behavior. The death of my brother must have been too much for him to handle." The man's voice faltered, choking on the words, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears. Michael's sharp eyes noticed the man's clenched fists, trembling slightly as though he was restraining himself. "He's pretending to be strong," Michael thought. A faint trace of respect flickered within him. "What happened to him?" Michael asked, glancing around the area. The monsters were gone, and his undead stood motionless, their commands fulfilled. Well, most of them anyway. Lily and another female orc with water-manipulating abilities were fussing over a third female orc who shared Lily's fire affinity. The third female orc, however, seemed more intent on scrubbing the blood off herself than paying attention to them. A clean freak orc, Michael mused, intrigued. The intelligence and unique quirks of his rare-rank creatures never ceased to fascinate him. Lucky, the gluttonous wolf with boundless potential, was a stark contrast to Prince, whose calm and responsible demeanor made him seem like the true elder brother of the army. They feel so alive despite being undead. Michael's thoughts were interrupted by the trembling voice of the youth from earlier. Blood dripped from the boy's mouth as he spat bitterly. "You have so much power. My father didn't die immediately when the monsters appeared. We were holding on until a stronger one came. But where were you? You were busy killing monsters that hadn't even attacked anyone yet." Michael's eyes narrowed as realization dawned. "So that's what this is about. If there was something Michael could acknowledge was wrong about him, it was that he was too understanding. The fact that he could reason with even a sliver of the demonic supernatural's mindset was proof of this, despite how evil their actions were. Though he didn't want to dwell on it, Michael couldn't help but imagine. If he had been powerless right now, and something had happened to his family while he survived, his grief might have driven him to blame someone, no matter if it was fair or not. But accusing others rudely was outright wrong, especially if he were the one on the receiving end of such disrespect. Michael wasn't going to lie. He was quite concerned about gaining experience points. Even so, the first monsters he cleared were the ones that were closest to people, and would pose an immediate threat to them before going after others to gain points. There was no way he would let someone get killed when he had the power to stop it. No matter how tempting experience points were, those wouldn't make him flinch in such a situation. Yet here he was, not only Michael accused but disrespected to his face, by someone who had just witnessed his capabilities. It seemed that in this world, only the adults possessed a proper sense of reality, sensibility, and survival instincts. At least, neither Michael from Earth, nor the original soul inhabiting this body would dare to grip someone's shirt after seeing them move at blurring speed. This scene made Michael remember a certain phrase he had often encountered as a novelist back on Earth, the phrase that would sometimes leave him cringing if used too many times in one sitting. And yet, in the current situation, the saying seemed to fit perfectly. This guy was courting death. The rude youth's body trembled as he stood and approached Michael, his voice laced with self-righteousness. I know all supernaturals are required to register with the Supers Association and protect the citizens. With your power, you're obviously someone who should carry the most responsibility, but you're nothing more than useless. If it was my uncle. Michael had no patience for the nonsense anymore. Without a word, he immediately cast a skill on him. A slow curse. Though the skill was at basic mastery and offered limited effects on an evenly matched opponent, against an ordinary human, it was devastating. Suddenly, the youth felt his movements turning slow. No, they didn't just slow, they halted completely. Looking into Michael's cold, expressionless eyes, dread filled his heart. The weight of Michael's overwhelming bloodlust washed over him, paralyzing the youth. I'm going to die, he thought, terror clutching his heart. Fortunately for him, Michael had no intention of killing him. Yes, I'm a member of the Supers Association, and yes, I'm tasked with protecting the public. But understand this, you are not entitled to my help simply because the association has imposed this role on me. Be careful, I'm not as patient or forgiving as you might hope. Michael's true feelings surfaced at that moment. He despised how his growing strength as a supernatural was forcing him to understand some of the twisted words spoken by the seniors on the forum, and even the warped ideologies of demonic supernaturals. The Federation. It was nothing short of a tyrant. He was expected to risk everything, his life and the lives of his loved ones, putting himself in danger with no apparent reward, all for the Federation's cause. And if he refused, he would be branded a criminal, all because their power spanned across the entire realm, leaving no room for dissent. Michael didn't know much about the Federation, which seemed to regard itself as a kingdom with supernaturals as its subjects. But from what he had seen so far, his impression of it was far from favorable. Of course, this didn't mean Michael planned to go rogue. Doing so would bring him no benefits and would in fact cause more trouble. As tyrannical as the Federation was, it still offered advantages like the resources and protections he couldn't afford to ignore. This, and he also didn't dare to. Releasing the curse, Michael watched as the rude youth nearly collapsed face first to the ground, but his uncle caught him just in time. Michael spoke, his voice like ice as he delivered his final words. Be careful who you speak to, especially people like me. You never know when someone might have the patience of a dog, none at all. Surprisingly, Michael's neighbor didn't react to his use of power on the nephew. Instead, the man acted as though it were normal, helping the boy up before addressing Michael. "Thank you for going easy on him," the man said with a smile that carried a deeper meaning. Michael felt a twinge of guilt. The man had just lost his brother, and now his nephew had been suppressed right in front of him, though the boy's rudeness had warranted it. As for whether this would bring trouble later, Michael didn't dwell on it. At most, the youth might try to stir up trouble, claiming Michael had abused his authority. If the Supers Association made an issue of it after everything he'd done to protect the public, it would only worsen his opinion of the Federation. Michael merely nodded at the man, ignoring the entitled nephew who, like so many other citizens, was blinded by a false sense of equality. Turning to the crowd, Michael raised his voice. "If you want to die, stay out here. More creatures will be coming through those cracks at any moment." The moment his words landed, the spectators, who had been in awe of Michael's earlier display of power when he conjured a magic circle with a mere hand gesture, snapped back to reality. Panic set in. Some rushed to more secure buildings, while others moved about indecisively. The most fearful were the seriously injured. Michael watched all of this. Initially, Michael didn't plan to get too involved, but knowing his aunt's eyes were likely on him now, he stepped up to take charge. Despite being one of the youngest present, Michael was undoubtedly the most powerful. After his recent show of strength, no one dared oppose him. However, his clear grasp of the situation soon earned him genuine respect. Aware that the next wave of monsters was only minutes away, Michael moved quickly to organize the crowd. He had his verdant wolf construct a dome-like shelter using thick, sturdy vines, directing people to take refuge inside. Compared to the fragile structures of the buildings around him, Michael trusted the durability of the vine dome far more. He also instructed the verdant wolf to wrap his apartment building in layers of vines, turning it into an armored fortress. After the initial chaos subsided, Michael noticed people peeking out from their windows in nearby buildings. He sent word around the community, asking those hiding if they wanted to join him in the shelter or remain in their apartments. To ensure safety, Michael deployed his undead to accompany the team spreading the message. He gave them specific instructions to handle any lurking monsters that might have been missed during the earlier skirmish. While some of the supernaturals assisting him could handle a few stray creatures, an overwhelming number could lead to unnecessary casualties, something Michael wanted to prevent. "Those, your people, who are they?" The elderly man, who was the first person to speak with Michael after the initial wave, asked cautiously, each word carefully chosen. Michael found the effort mildly amusing, but couldn't also help feel a growing respect for the old man. Though Michael didn't know how cultivators aged, he suspected that this man was far older than he looked, and he already appeared ancient. "They're my people," Michael replied after a pause. He'd initially considered saying undead, but the term felt too loaded, especially for ordinary people whose first encounter with the supernatural might have been this very event. Michael wouldn't assume that the man's status as a knight meant he was well versed in the intricacies of the supernatural world. If it had been just his undead wolves and the blue ape, Michael wouldn't have hesitated, to be honest. But the orcs complicated things. The female orcs, unarmored unlike their male counterparts, had humanoid appearance and could almost pass for human aside from their greenish-gray skin and unusual hair. The male orcs, clad in heavy armor, looked imposing but not monstrous. Calling them undead might lead people to assume he had killed humans to raise them, a conclusion that wasn't hard for one to jump upon. The human mind was remarkable in its ability to twist facts to fit a narrative. Michael recalled how one of his friends back on Earth had broken up with his girlfriend over a misunderstanding. She accused him of cheating simply because he hadn't replied to her messages one night. The truth, he had fallen asleep. Though everyone knew the truth, the argument she presented made her perspective seem almost logical. They eventually reconciled and even married, but the incident left a lasting impression on Michael. Later, it came to light that she'd been tired of his friend's almost nonchalant attitude and wanted to test if he cared enough to fight for her. Women. Well, both sides had been toxic in their own rights. Michael saw that the old man was about to speak again, but knowing there wasn't much time left, he cut him off. "Those monsters will be coming here any minute now. Please, get inside." The old man hesitated for a moment, his wary gaze fixed on the sky before he finally nodded and retreated into one of the vine-dome shelters Michael's Undead had constructed. Inside the makeshift sanctuary, fear was palpable among the cramped and anxious survivors. To Michael's surprise, a significant portion of the community, 48 people, had chosen to place their trust in him. Despite the chaos and bloodshed, 48 people had opted to stay within the protective range of his undead. This was in stark contrast to the remaining survivors, who either stayed barricaded in their homes, convinced that they were safer there, or had other reasons that Michael didn't care to ponder. As expected, the supernaturals who had helped earlier had wisely decided to sit out the next round. Their senses, though less refined than Michael's, were still sharp enough to feel the rising tension in the air. The chaotic energy in the sky didn't need to announce itself for them to realize that what had nearly killed them earlier had merely been a prelude. In the end, Michael stood alone with his undead, surrounded by a community that was now a battlefield littered with blood, corpses, both human and monster, and the frightened whispers of those hopping for salvation. "It's going to break any minute now," Michael muttered, his sharp gaze locked on the cracks spreading through the sky. "Though I doubt the second wave will be anything but overwhelmingly strong, I can't afford to let my guard down. Monsters are flooding the city, and I doubt most areas have anyone capable enough to deal with them." The thought sent a shiver down his spine, conjuring grim images of the devastation outside the community gates. Perhaps beyond these community walls lay the true apocalypse. Taking a look around, Michael surveyed his surroundings for one last time. The Vine Dome stood firm, each sheltering at least 15 people. His apartment building, now sealed off completely, housed his family, guarded vigilantly by his undead. As for those still hiding in their homes, Michael was also prepared to protect them if possible. But if he couldn't, well, there wasn't much he could do. At least now, with fewer people in the open, he could fight with complete focus. "This chaos should be enough to help me level up a few times, right?" Michael thought, a glimmer of excitement crossing his eyes. He didn't even have time to open his status panel before the first round of monsters descended. Unlike before, these creatures didn't crash to their deaths or easily wound themselves upon impact. They were also unfamiliar to Michael, but all of them appeared to be of the same type. Rock Scorpion LV-12. Rank Common. Rock Scorpion LV-14. Rank Common. The Rock Scorpions were all Rank 1 creatures, typically requiring the power of a Rank 2 cultivator to handle. However, that was for cultivators. For Michael and his undead, these scorpions, despite their size, were little more than oversized targets. Bang! One of the male orcs wielding a Titan Wrath hammer launched the first attack, striking as soon as the monsters appeared. The hammer's shockwave effect bypassed the scorpion's thick exoskeleton, shattering its defense and killing it instantly. While the orc could have achieved a similar outcome with its strength alone, the hammer had significantly enhanced the damage. More notifications of monsters falling at the hands of his undead flashed before Michael's eyes, but he ignored them and instead chose to join the action himself. Though the Scorpion's rocky defenses were formidable against regular supernaturals, they were no match for Michael. With the spear in hand, he fought precisely, dealing damage just as effectively as his undead, slicing through the monsters with deadly accuracy and reducing them to pieces. "A few more and I'll be able to level up," Michael muttered under his breath, his eyes scanning for his next target. While Michael fought for experience points and ensured the safety of the people in his community, the rest of the city was engulfed in its own battles. Just as Michael had suspected, the entire city was embroiled in battle. It wasn't just the cracks spilling monsters that spread havoc. Demonic supernaturals were also at work, though they avoided smaller places like Michael's community. Small numbers and a lack of strategic value made such areas unworthy of their attention. The truth was, if the Supers Association were the city's only line of defense against the cracks appearing in the sky, the city would have still survived, albeit at the cost of significant damage and heavy casualties. The association branches weren't weak. Each branch had its own share of powerful individuals capable of handling level 1 to level 3-dimensional cracks. Under normal circumstances, the first rounds of chaos could have been mitigated, and order would have been restored before things escalated further. Unfortunately, the demonic supernaturals were well aware of this and had no intention of making things that easy. They had the weaker cultivators blend in with the monsters to attack ordinary citizens and supernaturals affiliated with the Supers Association. Meanwhile, their stronger cultivators maintained a barrier cast over the entire Woodstone city, preventing anyone from entering or leaving except themselves. The barrier not only sealed the city, but also blocked communication, and was heavily guarded by powerful demonic cultivators to prevent the Supers Association from destroying it and communicating with the outside world. The whole city was trapped in a prison. "Don't move, Brian. Our job here is just to check each other. If you move, I move," a man floating midair said with a faint smirk. His ability to hover in the air marked him as a rank 4 cultivator at least, a level just below the revered king rank. However, this man wasn't simply a rank 4 cultivator. He was a genuine king rank expert, a rank 5 cultivator, comparable to a rank 3 awakener. On the surface, that is. Though the two power systems were distinct, when standing at king's rank, a cultivator became untouchable for most awakeners below rank 3. At king's rank, cultivators could transcend realms without the aid of dimensional portals and even tap into the laws of the world, a feat that set them apart as true forces of nature. "If I were at king rank now, a monkey like you wouldn't have even dared to speak to me, you trash," the other man sneered, his voice laced with icy disdain. The speaker was Brian, a member of the Supers Association Michael was familiar with. Had Michael been there, he would have recognized the cold fury in Brian's eyes, a sharp contrast to his usually calm demeanor. "But you're not king rank, Brian. I am," the floating man retorted with an air of superiority. Brian's lips curled into a sharp grin as his words cut through the man's arrogance. "Then fight me, if you dare, Peter." The hovering man, who was now recognized as Peter, said nothing. His smug expression faltered, replaced by a cautious frown. In the night cultivation system, the first step in the journey was to awaken a life seed, which marked the beginning of a mortal's evolution into something greater. A peak rank 1 cultivator could comfortably live for 100 years. A rank 2 knight, who had evolved their life seed once, could live for 150 years. At this stage, they could infuse mana into their body and manipulate it to perform battle arts. A rank 3 knight, with their life seed evolved twice, could live for 200 years. At this point, The mana contained within their life seed could be externalized and used to cast spells. While this was still inferior to traditional mages, it was a significant improvement in their abilities. A rank 4 knight, having evolved their life seed thrice, reached the peak of their supernatural organs potential and could live for 300 years. They gained the ability to fly and could detonate their life seed temporarily to gain a terrifying boost in overall prowess. Beyond this, cultivation became exponentially challenging. A knight would need cultivation experience, a suitable cultivation method, talent, and comprehension to transform their life seed into a law seed. The strength of the comprehended law determined their power upon advancing to the king level, but also the difficulty of their breakthrough. For example, Brian was a half-step king-level cultivator who had comprehended a powerful law, but had been unable to transform his life seed into a law seed. He had been stuck at this stage for 50 years, a time marked by betrayal. 50 years ago, the man standing before him, someone Brian once called a friend, betrayed him and the Federation, advancing to rank 5 while Brian remained stagnant. "What's the matter? Don't dare to attack," Brian taunted, his voice sharp, almost mocking. If Michael had been here to witness this, he would have been shocked beyond belief. Was this the same man who once seemed indifferent, as though even the end of the world wouldn't faze him, behaving like this? Peter's frown deepened, but he remained still, making no move. Though on the surface he was stronger than Brian, he knew, after 50 long years, that appearances could be deceiving. The law of eternal embers. That was Brian's law, the foundation of his fearsome power. From the countless battles they had fought in the past, Peter had come to understand a few critical things about it. This law was devastatingly powerful. The law of eternal embers was a profound and destructive fire-based law rooted in the principles of perpetual burning and undying flames. Unlike ordinary fire laws, it did not focus solely on raw destructive power, but embodied the concept of persistence and regeneration through fire, making it a force of perpetual burning and undying flames, both creative and destructive. The flames conjured by this law never extinguished naturally. Only the cultivator himself, or a higher-tier law, could snuff them out. These flames devoured not only physical objects but also pure energy, consuming everything it touched and leaving nothing but ash in their wake. Worse still, Brian's techniques grew stronger the longer they were sustained. His flames became hotter, fiercer, and more destructive over time. It was a terrifying law, one that elevated him to the strength of an ordinary rank 5 cultivator, despite being stuck at half-step king level. But it came at a price. The sheer power of the law was too much for Brian's body to contain, which explained why he looked older than he should. It had drained his lifespan, which would usually be far longer at his stage, and was eroded by the relentless toll of his law. Still, Peter knew one thing. If he didn't attack first, Brian wouldn't either. Brian was undeniably strong. Peter couldn't deny that, but not strong enough to hold him back if he was dead set on not fighting him. If he decided to destroy the city, nothing would be able to stop him. It was this certainty that had kept Peter confident for years, keeping the Mad Phoenix at bay. At least that was what Peter believed, until he heard Brian's next words. There are 2 ways to advance to rank 5. Brian, who had been aggressive just moments ago, suddenly calmed down and spoke softly. His demeanor shifted into one Michael knew all too well. An eerie calmness. In the outermost reaches of the void, high above Woodstone, Brian hovered alongside Peter, his gaze fixed on the city below. Technically, Brian was still a rank 4 cultivator, and the barrier surrounding the city should have been enough to keep him out. Yet, it failed to do so. Not against someone with his level of power. Peter's frown deepened. He had no idea what Brian was getting to, but a sense of unease began to creep into his thoughts. To be honest, he'd rather face anyone else than this bastard. Unfortunately, by the time he realized the Mad Phoenix was here to guard against them, after the Federation had caught wind of their traces, it was far too late to change course. This operation was far too important to let his personal grievances interfere. Woodstone wasn't the only city under attack. Many others were already falling to their plan. This assault wasn't a spur-of-the-moment assault. It was the culmination of months of planning and coordination. Their objective was simple: reassert their group's prominence, recruit new members, and remind the world of an undeniable truth: supernaturals and ordinary mortals were not equals. They were kings. And as always, fear was their chosen weapon, the oldest trick in the book. The first way is to create your own law, and it can be shaped using the blueprint of others. This is the traditional path, the most stable one, Brian explained, his voice steady. The second way, he continued, his tone sharpening, is to use another's personal law, or rather to devour another person's law seed. If the person is already dead, it's not an issue. But do you know what happens when you extract it from someone who's still alive? They die. Yes, they die. And I'm sure someone like you knows this all too well, considering it's exactly how you advanced. Peter's frown deepened, as the weight of forgotten guilt stirred within him. Half a century ago, he and Brian were both hailed as two of the Federation's top geniuses, a reputation that masked the truth beneath. Peter had fought tooth and nail just to remain second to Brian. He had done everything in his power, cultivated relentlessly, and pushed himself to the limits in desperation to keep up. Yet, despite all his efforts, he barely managed to stay in the race. The only reason he could hold on was Brian's habit of diverting his focus to other pursuits. While this broadened Brian's overall strength, it also slowed his cultivation. And yet, despite all his efforts, Peter could never surpass him. But it wasn't Brian who drove him to the edge of despair. It was Brian's daughter, Isabella. She was the child of Brian and the woman Peter had loved, the woman who, in his eyes, had chosen someone better. If Peter and Brian were considered Federation geniuses, Isabella was in a league of her own. She was one of the rare holy children the realm could produce, a being with the potential of a god. Her talent was so overwhelming that it overshadowed the painful truth of her birth, that her existence had cost her mother's life. As much as Peter despised her, he couldn't deny the sheer enormity of her talent. She was a monster. At only 14 years old, Isabella had reached the half-step king rank, a feat achieved in just 4 years of cultivation. If Brian's talent had been a source of jealousy for Peter, Isabella's existence filled him with dread. She was a walking nightmare for him. He was consumed by envy and resentment. He admitted he shouldn't have felt this way, but the thought of a child, a 14-year-old born of his rival, and the sacrifice of the woman he loved, soon surpassing him in cultivation, made it unbearable. It was also around this time that Brian had begun approaching the comprehension of his law. So Peter acted. He killed her. On the day Isabella was advancing, the demonic supernaturals attacked Brian's residence to disrupt her breakthrough. That was when Peter made his move. As one of the Federation's most prominent geniuses, the Federation had spared no effort in protecting Isabella during this critical moment. They fortified Brian's residence and deployed elite forces to defend against the demonic supernaturals. Yet no one had expected the betrayal to come from within, and certainly not from Peter, someone who could almost be considered Isabella's half-father. To this day, Peter still dreamt of the look of disbelief on Isabella's face as his hand pierced her chest. "Uncle Peter." He could still hear her voice, soft and trembling, echoing in his mind, her last words before he detonated her body into nothingness. The only trace of her existence was the law seed he had taken, her law seed. A law she had comprehended, but never had the chance to wield. The law of wailing shadows. It was a necromantic law, rooted in the remnants of death, fear, and sorrow. For a child, he had always imagined to have lived like a princess in a fairy tale. For her to understand such darkness revealed that she, too, had a story, one no one would ever truly know. Unlike traditional necromantic powers that commanded legions of undead, this law thrived on subtlety and psychological manipulation. It turned the lingering energies of death into shadowy specters, intangible and insidious. These specters, born from the sorrow and regret of the dead, were harder to damage and devastating in mental warfare. It was a powerful law, one Peter had no right to wield with his original talent. Yet it was his now. What puzzled Peter, however, was Brian's reaction in the years since. While Brian clearly despised and hated him, often hurling insults or outright attacking him when they crossed paths, he avoided speaking directly about Isabella. He had remained silent about the betrayal that had claimed his daughter's life. Until today. For some reason, Brian had chosen to confront him now. Brian's voice broke the silence. "Do you know, Peter, I initially didn't care about whatever you demonic supernaturals were up to. Even when I heard you were planning something big, it didn't matter to me. But then I heard traces of you being found in this little city." Peter's expression darkened, but he said nothing, continuing to listen as he wondered what his old friend was planning, all while staying alert to his surroundings. "So I thought, why not pay my friend a visit like always? But I couldn't come empty-handed, could I?" An unsettling unease crept into his heart. The moment Peter heard this, he understood why he had been feeling uneasy. It was clear that Brian was setting him up for something. Without hesitation, he tried to flee, but just as he attempted to leave the void and enter the outside world, he felt a barrier stop him, as though he had hit an invisible wall. "What have you done?" Peter's voice turned sharp with anger, his eyes turning pitch black, and black mist began to emanate from his body. On the other side, Brian now appeared like a human figure wrapped in blue flames, exuding an overwhelming presence. With an air of majesty and grace, he slowly raised an object the size of a tennis ball in his hand. It looked like an unremarkable stone symbol, but Peter recognized it instantly. The Voidlock sigil, bastard, how do you have his treasure? Peter's eyes widened. A wild smile slowly spread across Brian's lips, yet his voice remained soft. "It's simple. The only value of a man who has lost everything is himself. And what does such a value mean to me when the one who took everything from me lives?" He answered his own question. "Nothing." Peter's heart sank as he glanced around. The space they floated in seemed unchanged, yet there was an undeniable shift in the air. The void, once vast and boundless, now felt constricted. "Do you really think your little tricks can hold me?" Peter sneered, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. The black mist around him surged, forming spectral figures that hissed and wailed, their cries echoing in the enclosed void. Brian chuckled, the sound devoid of humor. "Hold you? Oh, Peter, you misunderstand. This isn't a prison for you." His eyes burned with an intensity that made Peter flinch. "This is your grave." The temperature plummeted as Brian's aura exploded outward, the void trembling under the weight of his power. Flames, bright and unyielding, erupted around him, painting the dark expanse in hues of sky blue and deep blue. The embers danced with an eerie grace, their heat palpable even in the void. Peter's eyes widened. He can't be serious. "You can't sustain the eternal embers for long," Peter snapped, though his voice wavered. "It'll kill you." Brian shrugged, his flames growing brighter. "Perhaps, but what makes you think I'll be the only one dying here?" Peter's mind raced. He had known Brian to be reckless, but this was madness. It really did fit his name, Mad Phoenix. You're willing to throw your life away for revenge. Brian's expression darkened, and for the first time, Peter saw the raw pain hidden beneath the calm facade. This isn't just revenge, Peter. This is justice for Isabella. The wailing shadows surged forward, but the eternal embers roared in response, consuming them before they could reach their target. The two forces clashed violently, the void trembling under the strain of their battle. Peter gritted his teeth, his confidence unraveling with each passing second. You think you can kill me? You're nothing more than a half-step king. And yet here you are running scared, Brian shot back, his flames intensifying. Face it, Peter. You might have stolen her law, but you don't have the strength to wield it properly. You're nothing without her. Just as he finished speaking, Brian attacked directly with a law skill. Laws were the embodiment of nature's rules, the foundation upon which the world operated. To supernaturals, they were the key to understanding the world and becoming one with it. Law skills were techniques that demonstrated a supernatural's mastery and comprehension of their law. These skills could either be individually created or learned from the blueprint of another's understanding. Blaze of Devoural. The concept behind this law skill was simple yet terrifying. Fire not only burns, it consumes. While this idea was common among fire laws, it was uniquely extreme when tied to Brian's law of eternal embers. The fire summoned by Blaze of Devoural didn't merely scorch. It sought out and consumed any form of energy or material it encountered. Its principle revolved around the absorption of everything into the unyielding flame, leaving nothing but emptiness in its wake. A ball of concentrated blue flames appeared above Brian's hand, its heat so intense that the surrounding void seemed to ripple and twist. Without hesitation, he hurled it toward Peter. Peter, all too familiar with this devastating move, reacted instantly. His law of wailing shadow flared to life. With a sharp motion, he invoked a skill tied to his law. Phantom Abyss. The shadows around him surged, forming a massive whirlpool that sucked in the surrounding energy, including the advancing flames. The blue fire resisted fiercely, but the abyss grew deeper, darker, and more oppressive, dragging the flames into its depths. Had they been on the same level, Brian would have undoubtedly emerged victorious. However, the harsh reality was that he was still only a rank 4 cultivator. While his law of eternal embers granted him formidable advantages, his rank imposed significant limitations. Peter's law of wailing shadows wasn't inherently superior to Brian's law of eternal embers. However, Peter's rank as a higher-level cultivator gave his law an undeniable edge. For a moment, the void was silent, and the two laws battled for supremacy. Then came an explosion of light and darkness, as the blaze of Devoural met the heart of the phantom abyss. The resulting shockwave sent both men flying, each forced to stabilize themselves as the void trembled under the clash of their powers. Brian wiped the blood trickling from his lip, his eyes burning with determination. Again! Without hesitation, Brian launched another attack. For the first time since that fateful day, he had managed to corner his enemy. He was strong, Brian knew that, but he also knew his limitations. By the end of this battle, he could very well be the one to die, and he had accepted that outcome the moment he stepped into this small city. He was ready to give his life. Every day, he still dreamed of his late wife and daughter, their faces haunting him, their voices blaming him for failing to avenge his daughter's deaths. The reason he had sought godhood had been for his daughter, yet the closer he came to understanding nature, the more he realized how insignificant he truly was. As blows were exchanged, Brian's thoughts wandered to the boy he had met just days ago. At first, he hadn't cared much for the rude brat, but after selling those corpses to him, something changed. When the boy returned, He carried an aura Brian was all too familiar with. Death energy. It gave Brian conflicted feelings, but he didn't hate the boy. Aside from demonic supernaturals and creatures like demons, those who came into contact with death energy were very rare. Like his daughter. Though the boy seemed greedy and carried a certain ruthlessness, perhaps driven by an urgent goal, Brian couldn't help but be impressed by his rapid growth. It reminded him of her. Everything reminded him of her. He wondered what might have been if she were still alive. If she had managed to ascend to the rank of King Cultivator, what if she had awakened? What heights could she have reached? The thought gnawed at him, even as he fought with all his strength. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like the video and comment down if anything wrong in the story. And if have any suggestion to a new novel or want next part of any series, comment down. Our target is to get 1K subscriber. There will be SUPRISC for all of you. Stay tuned.